Okay. Good morning. I apologize for the delay in starting today. Having a little technical difficulty, but I figured it out. Welcome to Bible study for this morning. We're going to be talking about the wives of Jacob. And as you can see here, we're going to be talking through a very complicated family tree today. So let us begin with prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for an opportunity to learn about the women of faith who have come before us, whose lives have been complicated and messy, but still you worked through them, just as you work through all of us. We ask that you would be with us, that you would bless us and those who we come in contact with, that all may know your love. Amen. All right, so the story of Jacob's wives needs a little bit of pre-work because this story is an interesting one. We have to start by going back to talk about Abraham and Sarah, who we spoke of last week. Hagar, I'm leaving on here because we talked about her and Ishmael, but they are not in this portion of the story. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, will go and get married to Rebekah, who was one of his cousins. And they will have twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau was the firstborn and was described as red and furry, and that's what his name means. It's the red one. And then Jacob is the secondborn, and he is born holding on to the heel of his brother, and Jacob means the one who deceives or the one who grasps the heel. And we're told in Genesis that during Rebekah's pregnancy, these two boys were like at odds with each other in the womb, to the point where she's like, these two boys may kill me. And the reason I talk about all this as his background is because this is a tale in which we begin a pattern of parents favoring one child over another. So we see in the story of Jacob and Esau, Isaac favors Esau, Rebekah favors Jacob. And it gets to the point where Rebekah helps Jacob, who is the secondborn, and therefore not the one who will receive the chunk of the inheritance. Rebekah helps Jacob twice trick Esau or Isaac out of Esau's blessing and inheritance. The first time, Esau's come in from hunting, he's very tired, and he's very hungry, and Jacob, who was more of the tent dweller, he was a cook, he said, if you give me your birthright, I will give you this bowl of red stuff, probably red lentils or something like that, but the scripture says red stuff. So Esau's like, he's so hungry, he's not thinking because he's hangry, so he says, yeah, give me the red stuff. And realizes later he's promised his younger brother the birthright. Then later, when Isaac is not in good health, he is nearing death, he calls for Esau and asks him to come so he can give him a blessing. But while Esau is off getting the things that Isaac has asked for, Jacob and Rebekah work together to trick Isaac by putting fur on Jacob's skin and bringing him the food that he has asked for, which Rebekah had already prepared because she wants her favorite son to get the birthright, and so the blessing comes to Jacob. Isaac realizes what's going on after the fact, does give a blessing to Esau, but at this point, Esau is in such a rage, Jacob needs to leave. And so he goes, at the instruction of Isaac and Rebekah, to the home of his uncle Laban, who is Rebekah's brother. And this is where we meet two sisters. The first sister and we meet her in Genesis chapter 29, is Rachel. We're going to begin in Genesis chapter 29, verse 1. When Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people to the east, as he looked, he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place at the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, son of Nahor?" They said, "We do." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "Yes. And here is his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep." He said, "Look, it is still broad daylight. It is not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban, Jacob went up, rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. When Laban heard about the news of his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him 1 month. So we first meet Rachel. There's going to be 4 wives here, so they're each going to get their own color, because why not? The first person we meet is Rachel, who is a shepherdess. We don't hear very often about shepherdesses in the scriptures, but in the Hebrew, that is how Rachel is referred to. Even in the New Revised Standard Version, I edited a little bit because it says because she kept the sheep, but the Hebrew text says she was a shepherdess. What this means is a very unique position for her because Rachel is tending sheep out in the fields, but she is also interacting with men on a regular basis with whom she is not related, which is very odd for this time and in this culture. Women were not to be interacting with men outside of their family at that particular time. It was just not done. But for Rachel, this does not seem to be a big thing. This seems to be a normal thing. She's taking her father's sheep out to be watered, taking them with the rest of the flocks to the pastures. What is also unique about this interaction between Jacob and Rachel is that Jacob kisses her first and then explains who he is, which, just as much now as then, probably a little weird, but no one has anything to say about it. And this is the only time in the scriptures, particularly in the Hebrew scriptures, where a man kisses a woman without them being married. So this is weird. But Jacob after he kisses her, he introduces himself, says who he is. She runs to get her dad, and Laban says, "Come on in, you are my flesh." Then about a month passes, and we don't know what happens during that month. But after that month, Laban goes to Jacob and says, "I can't not pay you for your work," and asks what he wants. And Jacob says, "I would like to marry your daughter Rachel." But there's a problem. Rachel is the younger daughter. Laban also has a daughter named Leah. In Hebrew, Leah means cow, and Rachel means ewe, like E-W-E, like a baby sheep. And what we learn is that Rachel is described as having a lovely figure and she's beautiful. Leah has, all it says about her, she has lovely eyes. Now this we have to go back to the Hebrew for, because in the NRSV, in the NRSV it does say here, the scripture I was reading yesterday said weak. Leah's eyes were lovely. But that's all we know about her. She had lovely eyes. Possibly big eyes, like a cow with like really cool eyelashes and beautiful. And so that's all we know about the description of these two women. That Rachel has a beautiful figure, Leah has lovely eyes. Laban agrees with Jacob that Jacob will work for 7 years on Laban's land, and then he may marry Rachel. And it says in verse 18, chapter 29, verse 18, Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. And Laban said, it is better that I should give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, this is after the 7 years, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. So instead of marrying Rachel, which is who he asked to marry, this was their bridal contract. So he did 7 years of labor in order to basically purchase Rachel. Neither Leah nor Rachel are seen to give consent in this story, which is opposite of what we see with the story of Isaac and Rebekah. So instead of bringing Rachel to Jacob on the wedding night, Laban brings Leah. We don't know why it takes till morning for Jacob to figure this out. Either she was wearing a veil or there had been a lot to consume adult beverage-wise that night, but for some reason, he didn't realize it till the next morning. When morning came, this is in verse 25, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? The deceiver has been deceived. Laban said, this is not done in our country, giving the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, which means the bridal week, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and returned and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. He served Laban for another 7 years. So now Jacob is married to both Rachel and Leah. We are told that he loves Leah, but loves Rachel more. One caveat about this story, it is really hard to untwine Jacob's story from the story of these two women. But I think their story and the story of their servants, Bilhah and Zilpah, who will come into the picture shortly, is a really important one to tell, because these four women are the ancestresses of Israel. Last week when we talked about Sarah and Hagar, one of the things that came about was this notion of fertility, and infertility being seen as a divine punishment. And so this is repeated here in this story. For it says in verse 31, this is still in chapter 29, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. And so we're working off of this same storyline here, where we have a woman who is barren, just like Sarah. Rachel is barren. And we have another woman who is fertile and can bear children, Hagar and Leah. Now, in this case, we have a servant and a mistress. And here we have two wives. Actually, the first wife is fertile. Second wife is not. And so we have different dynamics here. Let's see. Gotta pick a color. We're gonna come down here because Leah has a lot more kids. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben. And just for clarity's sake here, what I'm going to do is number these names because it's important, I think, to see the order in which all of these children are born, because there's going to be 13 total, 12 boys and a girl. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, which means, see, a son. For she said, because the Lord has looked on my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Giving birth to boys was seen to secure your position as a wife. And so Leah has provided Jacob with his firstborn son right off the bat. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she named him Simeon. I'm just going to do this. Boop. Simeon means has heard. And so you will see all these names are related to the reason, we see a son, yay, this is great, my position is secured. God has heard me and given me a second son. Again, she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be joined to me because I have borne him 3 sons. And she named him Levi. So I'm going to use medieval language here because I think it's fun. We have an heir and a spare and a second spare. So we have the firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, all boys. This is a huge thing in that time and culture because not only was Leah fertile, she was producing boys. And that was really important. Leah conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. And then she ceased bearing children. I call this portion of the story the Battle of the Wives because this is becoming like a real showdown between these two sisters. This is not like Sarah and Hagar where there was a power dynamic already present between the mistress and the servant. This is two women of equal status. One has social status as the first wife, the other one has status as the beloved wife, but the first wife, is the one having the boys. And so it says at the beginning of chapter 30, when Rachel saw she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. And she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." And Jacob became very angry with Rachel and said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" And Rachel said, here, this is where it gets complicated. And I've never in 15 years figured out how to draw this well. But here we go. Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear upon my knees, and that I too may have children through her. This is the same situation that happened with Sarah and Hagar. Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham to bear a child. Rachel is doing this now. She gave her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore, she named him Dan. Like I said, it's messy. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." So she named him Naphtali. What is different about Rachel and Bilhah versus Sarah and Hagar is Rachel fully takes on and acknowledges these children as her own. Sarah never did that with Ishmael. Sarah had contempt for Hagar and Ishmael, whereas Rachel was raising these children and acknowledging them as her own, which was the common practice at that time. And so even though Bilhah was taken as a wife, she still kept her status as a surrogate rather than having full wife status. But wait, there's more. Leah, seeing this all happen and seeing that she had ceased to bear children, took her maid Zilpah. Oh, did I run out of colors? And told Jacob, or gave her to Jacob as a wife. So same situation as here. Then Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good fortune." So she named him Gad. Number 7. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "Happy am I, for the women shall call me happy." So she named him Asher. Same situation as Rachel and Bilhah. Leah will acknowledge these children as her own. So they will not have full status as the same status as Rachel and Leah's children, but they are seen as the adopted children of Leah and Rachel, and they will care for them and they will treat them well. So far, we've got 8 kids, 8 boys to be specific. Leah has given birth to 4 boys. Rachel has 2 boys through her servant Bilhah. Leah has 2 more boys through her servant Zilpah. You would think that's enough. But we can also see that Rachel still hasn't born a child. Chapter 30, verse 14. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben, the oldest, went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God heeded Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my hire, because I gave my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar. She basically buys an evening with her husband for these mandrakes. Mandrakes, you probably, if you listen to fantasy stories, Harry Potter, mandrakes are brought up quite a bit. Mandrakes are called as such because their root looks like a human being, and they are written in ancient writings dating back to the 14th century BC. So they were well known and used for pain management and as a sedative, but they were also known for their aphrodisiac qualities and for their ability to cure infertility. And so we have seen that this has worked so far for Leah. Took the mandrakes, had an evening with her husband, and has born a fifth son, Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good dowry, because my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons." And so she named this son Zebulun. And then Leah gives birth to a final child. Who's going to put her up here? And they name her Dinah. I'm not going to number her, not out of disrespect for Dinah. Dinah's story is one that is important in this story. It is a side story, but when it comes down to the eventual naming of the 12 tribes of Israel, that is why I've been putting the numbers down, partially so we can see the birth order, but also because this is going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. Unfortunately, as a woman, Dinah doesn't count in that. And it's also interesting that after all of those descriptions of, see, God has done this for me, so I will call this child this, all we see is in chapter 30, verse 21, afterwards she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. So it appears, according to the writer of Genesis, at least this portion of Genesis, that Dinah is just kind of a footnote. She's acknowledged she is the only girl, but that's as far as we go, unfortunately. She will get her side story. It is terrible. It is. Right. So we have 11 kids, 10 boys, 1 girl. Still, no children for Rachel. Chapter 30, verse 22. After the birth of all of these children, God remembered Rachel, and God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. Number 11. So this is good news. Rachel has finally given birth to a child of her own, Joseph, who will become known in song and story, literally, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's another story for another day, and another cautionary tale about favoring one child over others. You would think his father would have learned a lesson from his upbringing, but no such luck. So after the birth of Joseph, Jacob goes to Laban and says, look, I have my family. I would like to take my family back to my homeland and all the things that I have earned. Let us go home. And you got to give it to him. This man served 14 years for his uncle, in addition to all the time it took to give birth to 12 children. So that's quite some time. So we can count in this time of the birthing of the children within that second 7 years, because Rachel was married to Jacob a week after Leah was. And so I would say we're looking at 7 years, 14, getting close to 20 years. I'm just going to be generous. I don't know how quickly these kids came together because we're not told that. Laban says, no, you need to stay with me because I've divined that I have been blessed because of you. And so Jacob and Laban make a deal for livestock, how they're going to split it up. And Jacob is a really good and very shrewd shepherd. And so he knows how to breed flocks to get what he wants. And so his flocks are increased, but it's following in exactly the same line as the agreement that he has with his father-in-law. In chapter 30, verse 31, Laban says, what shall I give to you? And Jacob says, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again feed your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And such shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and the black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day, Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. So Laban is trying again to deceive Jacob. Verse 37. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane and peeled white streaks into them, exposing the white of the rods. He set the rods that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the trough, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the rods. So the flocks produced young that were striped, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and the completely black animals in the flock of Laban, And he put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob laid the rods and the troughs between the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the rods. But for the feebler of the flock, he did not lay them there. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. And so we see game meets game right here. The two gentlemen are now playing games with each other. Laban figured this out, and so Jacob falls out of favor with him. And so Jacob and Leah and Rachel decide that it is time to go. And Jacob goes to Leah and Rachel and says, I'm not in your father's favor anymore. God has taken away the livestock of your father and given it to me. But Rachel and Leah, after telling them about his dreams, telling them about what has happened between Jacob and his father-in-law, Leah and Rachel answer, this is chapter 31, verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house?" Meaning, is there any piece of the bride price, any of the wealth that we were promised when we were married that is left? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has been using up the money given for us. All the property that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. And so Jacob arose and set his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock, all the property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all he had. Starting out, he crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. And so we see here, Jacob's getting ready to go. Laban and him have had a falling out. Rachel and Leah together are on board. They've realized that their father has basically treated them as a commodity, sold them to this man, and then spent all the money that he would have received with Jacob working for him, which was probably a lot of money because Jacob was a really good shepherd, or at least he turned into one. And on the way out the door, Rachel takes the household gods. I think it's a really important thing to note in this story that we don't see Rachel talking specifically about the God of Israel. We don't know that she worships the God of Israel. In fact, when Laban catches up to them in a couple days and is looking for the household gods, Jacob has no idea that Rachel has stolen them. Neither does Leah. This is an all Rachel thing. And so Laban is going tent to tent, looking for these household gods. And Rachel puts them under a blanket and sits down on top of them and says, "They are not here, and I'm not going to get up because I am in the way of women." Meaning it was her time of the month. And because she was unclean, because she was in the way of women, Laban left. It is possible, some scholars believe, that the household gods of Laban were also the household gods of Rachel. We don't know this for sure. What we do know is that Genesis was written in a time where there was acknowledgement that people within the community worshipped other gods. That's why we have the first commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," because there is acknowledgement that there are other gods around. We hear about this later on when Elijah goes up in a battle against the priests of Baal. And so this is a thing. This is not unusual during this time. And then Rachel disappears for a bit. Leah will too, from the story. And when she reappears, it will be after the story of Dinah. It will be after Jacob and Esau have reunited. We will see still, as Jacob and Esau are reunited, that Leah still has a lower place. For when Jacob reunites with his brother, what he will do is he will put the children, he will put himself in the front, then he will put the children in order of their importance. And so he will take Zilpah and Bilhah and their 4 boys and put them in the front. And then Leah and her brood, and then Rachel and Joseph will come last. They are the most important to him, therefore they are the most to be protected. And that is why he puts them in that order, because he is deathly afraid that Esau is going to try to kill him. Instead, what happens is the 2 men reunite. I don't know if they're ever going to get over all the stuff, but they embrace, and they are reunited, and there seems to be peace between the 2 of them, even though there still needs to be some space. As I said, Rachel disappears for a bit, and then when she comes back, she's pregnant once again, and she has a very, very difficult childbirth that takes her life. And while she originally names Benjamin, the son of my sorrow, Ben-Omi, Jacob will rename him Benjamin, the son of my right hand. And what we see with the death of Rachel is that she is buried alone on the side of the road. Later, when we hear about the death of Leah, who also disappears for a bit, and then we hear later about her death while Jacob is blessing his sons, that Leah, the first wife, the one who was not loved as much as Rachel, but she gets the honors of first wife and is buried in the same location as Isaac and Rebekah and Abraham and Sarah, and Jacob will join them in the cave that Abraham purchased in order to bury Sarah. And so the end of the story for these 2 women, Rachel and Leah, is that the one who was loved, the one who was sought after, has a very tragic end. Dying in childbirth and having to be buried on the road to Bethel. Now, Jacob built a pillar there to mark the place where she was buried, but she's not buried with her family. She's buried alone. Whereas what we will see, we don't know the cause of death for Leah, but we do hear Jacob say that she is buried with the ancestors, with the family of Jacob, in the tomb where she's honored as the first wife. Even though in life, while she did bear 6 boys for Jacob, she was the mother of the daughter of Jacob, she was not as well loved, but she's still honored in the end. As for Zilpah and Bilhah, after the death of Rachel, these 2 women are elevated in status. Their sons become fully incorporated into the 12 tribes of Israel. We don't hear about the deaths of these women. Their story, in some ways, is similar to Rachel and Leah's. We do not hear that Rachel and Leah consent to their marriages to Jacob, and we know for a fact from the language that was used in the Hebrew to write Genesis, that neither Bilhah nor Zilpah were given a choice as to whether or not to lay with Jacob. They were handed over. They did not consent. But their sons, these 4 boys, become fully a part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so it is important to remember these names, and it adds to that complication of the understanding of slavery in that time and the culture of surrogacy and how these 2 women were seen as surrogates for their mistresses, and they will not be elevated until the death of the beloved wife in status. However, their sons will not be forgotten. And it's important to tell the stories of these women so that they are not forgotten either, because they too are the mothers of the tribes of Israel. And so we could call this story either the wives of Jacob or the mothers of the tribes of Israel. It is so intertwined with the stories of the men that are a part of their lives, because you can't disentangle Jacob from this story. You really can't disentangle Laban from this story either. But from these 4 women come the tribes of Israel. And that's a pretty cool thing to remember. Next week, we're going to learn about Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth. So we're going to take a look at their story. Their story is very unique because there are men that are a part of the story, but most of this story of Ruth and Naomi focuses just on these 2 women. So it's easier to do some work in learning about these women apart from the men who are part of their lives. Let's close with prayer. Oh God, through the stories of the mothers of the tribes of Israel, we see that relationships are complicated, that lives are messy, and they are difficult. And sometimes we have a hard time negotiating what it means for us in our time and in our place. We thank you for these women whom you made the mothers of the tribes of Israel. We thank you for their faithfulness to them, for the ways that you lifted up their sons and made their sons into a people who were chosen but broken, just as we are. Help us in this day and in the rest of the week to remember that we too are chosen and broken, and that you are faithful to us always. And that you lift us up and give us a name above all names, and that is beloved child of God. Amen. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for your flexibility in joining me at an earlier hour. We will be back next week at 12:15, again with the story of Ruth and Naomi. Have a great rest of your day.